February 16th. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Yes, Madam President. Councilmember Nuri Martinez.
Present.
Councilmember Joe Buscaino.
Here.
Councilmember Mark Ridley Thomas.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam President.
Okay, before we begin our discussion, let's go ahead and take public comment. Can you please read the call-in information followed by our city attorney to explain the speaking rules?
Certainly. Members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on the agenda should call 1-669-254-5252. Again, the number is 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-593-4341. Again, the meeting ID number is 160-593-4341. And then press pound. Press pound again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press *9 to request to speak.
To members of the public calling in, when it's your turn to speak, please state which of the agenda items you'd like to speak on. You have 1 minute per item to speak, up to 2 minutes total. Because this is a special meeting, there will be no general public comment, just on the items. We'll tell you when your time's up. When speaking on the agenda items, you must be on topic. If you're not on topic, or if we can't tell whether you're on topic, you'll get one brief warning from me or the president. If you don't get clearly back on topic, or you go off topic again, the president will cut you off and you'll forfeit the rest of your speaking time. For members of the public calling in to speak, as soon as you hear someone address you by listing off the last 4 digits of your telephone number or other identifying information if you're calling within a block number, you're live at the council meeting. Please immediately press *6 to tell us which items you'd like to speak on. We understand you may be listening on a computer, television, or other device. If you are, please turn down the volume on those devices immediately because there's a time delay and then we'll get feedback. Do keep one ear on the phone though, because as soon as you hear us identify you, you need to press *6 right away. We don't want to think because of the time delay that you're no longer on the line. We're ready to take public comment, Madam President.
Please take the first caller.
Caller with the last 4 digits 7543. Please press *6 to unmute yourself and say your name and the items you would like to speak on.
Hi. Hi, my name is Lionel. I'm from City 6. And I'd like to speak on item 1, I believe.
Please go ahead. You have a minute.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fabo. I'd like to support LADLT's legislative priorities, and I'm asking the Rules Committee and the full City Council to agendize and pass LADLT's legislative priorities because, one, we need to bring down the speed limits on our streets because I've seen motorists driving really, really fast. 2, bring down speeds on local streets with undue cost. Protect children and the elderly because they are the most vulnerable, the children and the elderly. And post speed limits and operating speeds on streets that are already slow. And finally, maintain consistent speed limits over time. So I'm asking the City Council to prioritize the LADLT's legislative priorities. Thank you very much for taking in my consideration and your time, Mr. Fabo, and council members and Council President Nuri Martinez.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Caller with the last 4 digits 4208. Please press *6 to unmute yourself and say your name and the items you would like to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits 4208. Please press *6 to unmute yourself and say your name and the items you would like to speak on.
Hello?
Yes, what items would you like to speak on? We can hear you. If you're listening on another device, turn down the volume. Which items do you like to speak on?
I'm not Fabo. The first time I tried to unmute myself, it said that I couldn't unmute myself.
Which items would you like to speak on?
This is Rob Kwan. I'd like to speak on items 10 and 11.
Please go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, for item 11, I just wanted to note that this is something that, you know, we might not really want to take any action on this given the delay in the census and the fact that our current redistricting timeline has been blown up by the delays in the census. The forecast that we wouldn't be getting block level data until September 23rd would really leave us with no time to get lines by the December 9th deadline that county is asking for, so they can begin precincting, and it won't match up with our charter deadline. So just wanted to note that you might want to get your lobbyists bothering Gavin Newsom and the state legislature to figure that out, because whether our primary need to be pushed back or we need to figure something else out, whatever we're doing, the timeline we've been working off of isn't going to work. I also just want to say hello to our new committee members. I thought that Councilmember Rodriguez had some great questions at the Budget and Finance meeting the other week, and I hope when Councilmember Martinez finally decides to have something substantive before this committee, you bring that same energy and vigor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, then there is no other speakers and public comments, so public comment is closed. Members, if there is no questions on items 2 and 4 and items 6 through 13, I'd like to recommend that we move those on consent.
Move the items.
The items is item number 2 and item number 4, and items 6 through 13. I believe Mr. Riley Thomas has a question on 5, and Mr. Buscaino, you've got a question on 3.
3.
All right, so without objections, those items will go ahead and be approved on consent. So why don't we go ahead and go to item number 3. Mr. Buscaino, did you have questions on this item or comments?
Thank you, Madam President. In regards to the Port of Los Angeles' state and federal legislation program for 21-22.
Do you have questions for them? Because I've got them on. I can bring them into the meeting.
Yes, please, if you can bring them in.
Give me just a second.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have, is that Jen Cohen? Jen Cohen, how are you? I haven't seen her in over a year.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Jen. Okay, so if you can hear us, just can you speak into the mic so that we make sure we can hear you? Jen?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay, Mr. Buscaino, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, Ms. Cohen, and thanks for joining us, is in regards to the harbor maintenance tax, something that we've been advocating for equity and fairness in that funding, and wondering how optimistic is the port that the funding will be distributed more equally in the future. I know this is something that our now Supervisor Janice Hahn advocated for while she was in Congress. How soon do you anticipate the increase in funding? Does the port have any projects in mind that would benefit from this additional revenue?
Sure. Well, I have good news in that the Water Resource Development Act of 2020 was signed into law at the very end of 2020. And with that does come greater equity for the harbor maintenance tax, and we should be seeing more funding come to the port. Unfortunately, those changes won't go into effect until FY23. So we are going to see sort of a similar about $5 million returning to the Port of Los Angeles over the next 2 years. But then we will see a substantial jump in FY23 with about $56 million coming towards the port if everything goes as planned. So it's a great opportunity, a little bit slower than we would like, but still beneficial.
Fantastic. As we know, historically, our port's been a donor port to other ports across the country. So appreciate that effort and that advocacy on behalf of the port here. Also glad to see the work that's being done on the environmental side. Particularly interested in the Clean Truck program. Is there any update that you can provide for the committee, and where in the process of adopting a rate are we at right now? Do we know?
I don't have an update on the timing for the adoption of the rate. I can tell you that across the board, we are moving forward on a number of fronts, looking to see how to use the limited resources to have the biggest bang for the buck, and then also advocating for some sales tax exemptions at the state level to make these trucks more affordable. As you know, the truckers are taking a giant jump from a traditional diesel truck being about $50,000 at this point in time to a new zero-emission truck being in the neighborhood of $350,000. And so we're working on all fronts to make that more feasible and a little bit less painful for our truckers.
Thanks, Jen, for that. And lastly, President Biden has moved on the expansion, or at least finding funding for, particularly the space around climate change. He's indicated in his efforts wanting to infuse federal dollars into impacted, disadvantaged communities like the port communities. There's an opportunity there, and I just want to know where the ports are, where the lobbyists are in D.C. and how we can leverage those dollars in our port communities.
Absolutely. We're thrilled that the new administration has environmental objectives that align with ours. We see this as a great opportunity for partnership that we didn't have in the previous administration. And so we are working hard with our lobbyists to make sure that our infrastructure priorities that align with both the state and federal and local environmental initiatives are front and center.
One thing that just came out, and I'm looking at introducing a motion soon, on the California bill that targets 10 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2040. What better way to do that than have it here in our own backyard? I'm looking forward to working with the port to find a way as we march toward a zero emissions port, but at the same time be able to create these green jobs at our port complex. So I believe Assembly Member David Chu proposed the targets in this new bill, and really excited to work with the state legislature and the administration to advance these offshore wind capacities. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Buscaino. Nice to see you, Ms. Cohen.
Likewise, Madam President.
Let's go ahead and vote on this item. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll on item 3.
Yes, Madam President. Councilmember Nuri Martinez.
Aye.
Councilmember Joe Buscaino.
Aye.
Councilmember Mark Ridley Thomas.
Aye.
Item is approved, Madam President.
Thank you. Let's move on to item number 5. This was called special by Mr. Ridley Thomas. Sir?
Madam President, we often say that budgets reflect our priorities, and this council, which represents the largest city in the state of California and is the epicenter of homelessness across our state, should vigorously support AB 71 and thereby declare that addressing homelessness must be a priority for the state of California. This is not an initial effort in this regard, but it is one that we must consistently advance if we expect relief. And so AB 71 essentially calls for the allocation of $2.4 billion annually across the state. It proposes that this be precisely what can happen in order to help facilitate, to undergird what we've been discussing, Madam Chair, and Mr. Buscaino, around the question of the right to housing. So it's time for us to engage our colleagues in Sacramento to help us at the local level to meet this crisis head on. Can't do it without the requisite resources. These are resources that are fundamentally required for us to make a meaningful difference. I think AB 71 is a critical path in that direction, and I appeal to the members of this committee to move forward with this piece of legislation and to release our legislative advocates to do all that they can to facilitate its passage. Madam Chair?
Thank you, sir. Let's go ahead and prepare to vote on this item. Item number 5. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Nuri Martinez.
Aye.
Councilmember Joe Buscaino.
Aye.
Councilmember Mark Ridley Thomas.
Aye.
And the item passes, Madam President.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clerk, let's go ahead and read item number 1 into the record. And I believe we have a presentation from the department, but why don't I allow you to go ahead and read this into the record first?
Certainly. Item number 1 is a Chief Legislative Analyst Report and resolutions relative to recommendation for the city's 2021-22 state and federal legislative program as submitted by the Los Angeles Department of Transportation.
Okay, thank you. And we have Ms. Connie Llanos. Can you hear us? Another female colleague we haven't seen in a year. Nice to see you on Zoom. She's an Assistant General Manager with the Department of Transportation. Why don't you go ahead and give us a quick overview on item number 1 before we get into questions from the committee. Go ahead.
Happy to do so. Thank you again, Madam President. I'll just introduce myself again, Connie Llanos, Assistant General Manager over External Affairs at the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. Happy to talk about our legislative proposal this year. We did take an approach that was intentionally streamlined. For this year, we really wanted to focus on key priorities that have been policy priorities for the department for quite some time. So as you're reading through this proposal, hopefully you won't be surprised by any of the items that are included because they are all repeats from last year. Essentially, you can put them into 3 buckets. As far as our proposal, we focused on speed safety measures, we focused on parking reform measures, and we focused on emerging mobility measures that we can benefit from some legislative reforms on. On the speed safety arena, 2 of the items are items that we've been focused on for, again, quite some time. One is how we handle speed setting in California, which unfortunately forces us to often set our speeds to the limits that are actually the prevailing conditions, not the safest conditions for our streets. As you know, Vision Zero and making sure that we have an end to traffic fatalities is a key priority for the Department of Transportation. So in working with legislators in Sacramento for several years now, we've been able to identify some ways where we can still work within the 85th percentile to achieve some really important reforms. These reforms would include being able to have some flexibility on how we set speeds in vulnerable areas like around school zones, senior centers, homeless centers. This would also ensure that cities are not required to increase speed limits on streets where we haven't made any major design or engineering changes, simply because a survey seems to find that the majority of people are operating or traveling at a faster speed. We're also looking to pursue the opportunity to be able to opt in to a automated speed enforcement or speed safety program with a speed safety camera program. What we're doing here is really opening up the conversation for how we might be able to increase the tools that we have at our disposal to help enforce speeding. Speed cameras is something that has been, again, proposed by the department for several years now. I think what we've learned after having these discussions for a couple years is that we want to approach this in a very careful manner. We want to make sure that we're being really sensitive to how these cameras are deployed, that we're not overburdening communities that are already either over-policed or that would bear the financial burden. We would have systems in place where we could have warnings for folks before we would deploy. And truly, really important to note that what we're asking for here is the ability to opt into a program. Obviously, developing a program would be up to the City Council to define and really be able to establish. In addition to that, around parking reforms, we're looking at a couple of different ways in which we can strengthen our parking enforcement capacity. One way is in being able to address disabled placard abuse. This is a long-standing priority for the department. We're consistently looking for ways where we can ensure that our disabled community does have access to that limited curb space that is their right to have access to. We're also looking to expand our tools, as we are facing budget cuts and retirements. Our teams on our parking enforcement division are much leaner than they were before, and so we're looking to tools like automated license plate readers. In particular parts of our enforcement work, possibly in some sort of pilot, for example, with bus-only lanes. That's been the conversations around legislative proposals in the past with automated license plate readers. This would simply allow us to be able to actually have equitable parking enforcement throughout the city, despite the ebb and flow that we might have with our operational staffing. And lastly, around emerging mobility, as a city, we've done a lot of work to really try and establish a 21st century city. And that has really included the work we've done at the Department of Transportation to make sure that we have the tools that we need to help inspire innovation and invite different sorts of transportation modes into our city and permit them. Things like scooters, dockless scooters, that Councilmember Vizcaíno helped to bring in CD15 a few years back. But we've deployed some tools that really allow us to hold these companies accountable so that we can actually have these modes within the city, but that we can also make sure that the companies that are doing their business in Los Angeles are adhering to our rules. And so things like having access to data, in particular disaggregated data, have become really important to the Department of Transportation. So we're looking to protect that in our legislative proposal. We're also looking to have the ability to study the opportunities to have a pilot program that might allow us to do some work with other county agencies around local permitting of transportation network companies, or TNCs. So that summarizes our legislative program for this year. Again, the real focus was to have a streamlined approach that focused on longstanding policy priorities that help us to save lives, streamline our processes, as well as make sure that we're able to hold companies accountable and protect the public right of way.
Thank you, Ms. Llanos. And I think I can start with a few questions that I had. So, traffic accidents are one of the leading causes of death in the city of Los Angeles, and low-income communities in particular are overwhelmingly bear the burden of some of these violent accidents in some of our neighborhoods. So I'm really happy that many of the department's priorities address street safety, which is really important for me. However, I am concerned that some of these priorities will harm some of the same communities that we're trying to protect. And so in terms of your automatic speed enforcement and automatic license plate recognition, how do we ensure that they will not create more policing or surveillance of Black and brown communities?
Thank you for that question. As I alluded to in our comments, I think both of these technologies are technologies that have been part of our legislative package for quite some time, and that of many other cities throughout California that are looking to increase the safety on their streets or have made Vision Zero commitments. They're sort of part of the Vision Zero network toolbox of legislative proposals. I think what we've learned in the last few years is that how these tools are deployed, the tools might have merit and value, but how they're deployed is really important. So thinking about, for example, where the cameras are placed, and that you don't have all of the cameras only in communities of color and high poverty, but that you're being more thoughtful about that approach, that you're being thoughtful about the fines that are associated with speed citations that would be the result of cameras. Can you look at reduced fines? Can you look at a extended period of warning so that it isn't a financial burden, but that we're really sort of creating behavior change? I think that that's really key and important. I also think it's about having conversations with stakeholders and having a very thoughtful approach. So we are opening the door by saying, let's advocate for the ability for cities to opt in. But I think how you deploy the program, making sure that it's inclusive, that you have plenty of community engagement, and that you're thinking about exactly those items that you mentioned front and center, so that when you're designing the program, you're designing it to not fall into those traps, will be key. And that is certainly the commitment of our department if we do in fact get the ability to have those conversations.
Okay, and is there any other things that the city can do to ensure that people don't park in the bus-only lanes that the city is investing in?
Well, I know that we have done, and I think I have some folks here from our parking enforcement team, so they can correct me if I'm wrong. We have done kind of targeted enforcement so that our officers are out there watching physically to see, who's parking in the lane and sort of handling it on a one-off basis. That's how we know that it's a persistent issue, or more than just anecdotally, we do have some validation, some data to prove that it is actually an issue that we need to solve for. The problem is that it's very limited, the bandwidth to be able to do that on an ongoing basis citywide. So a tool like ALPR would simply allow us to be able to enforce in a more robust way, citywide, equitably, frankly. And I think that, again, it's similar to speeding. We're talking about wanting to help change behavior, and these tools do allow us to do that on a much larger scale than just having either our officers or LAPD officers citing on a one-off basis.
All right. Well, thank you. And the last thing I'll say is, members support the priorities by the department. However, if the state does allow us to move forward, I do expect the department to work with Black and Brown communities to ensure that these policies will be carried out equitably. And I don't mean hearing from the folks who we always hear from, but I'm actually talking about the very people that live in these neighborhoods. I think it's important for all of us to make sure we're addressing their needs in an equitable way. Oftentimes we hear from a lot of people that don't necessarily live in these neighborhoods, but think they can speak on behalf of these neighborhoods. And we welcome allies, but we welcome the people who actually are impacted by these policies that we vote on every single day to be heard. So moving forward, that's my expectation, because I think that although it's important to talk about equity, it looks very differently once we actually implement it. So appreciate your comments, Ms. Llanos. Members, do we have any other questions or comments you'd like to make? Seeing none? All right, so for item number 1, I'd like to move the approval of the CLA report and the attached resolution. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Riley Thomas. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Certainly, Madam President. Councilmember Nuri Martinez.
Present.
Councilmember Joe Buscaino.
Aye.
Councilmember Mark Ridley Thomas.
Aye.
Item is approved, Madam President.
All right, thank you. Members, our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you.